if we could just put it in a box, your hopes and dreams for your future.
Well, my future is like, I don't know. Right at this very moment, it looks like a swirling black void. I don't quite know.
Me and Tim Burton have the same life. He and I both started out by making films with our friends in the backyard. His on film, mine on mini DV. Fascinated and inspired by the TV world we grew up with, only he was to me what Vincent Price was to him. He was also an accomplished artist early on, his drawings taking inspiration from the world around him. I hustled the neighborhood kids into paying me their allowance to draw their favorite Pokemon. Eventually, Tim Burton's skills as an animator and illustrator caught the attention of Disney.
He had done a pencil test at CalArts on this mad scientist trying to anesthetize this helpless victim. So I said, let's put it in color, let's put it in 35 millimeter and become big-time movie makers. He just kept looking down and said to me, I want to be a director. I want to do this. Let's do this.
My friends all said my animations were cool, but Disney never called. Tim Burton went on to find massive success in the movie industry, carving a path with his weird art and being tremendously successful. Sadly, that's where our remarkably otherwise exactly similar lives tether apart. But I still make my movies and I still make my animations, and they've played in smaller theaters nonetheless, so I hope I can offer a fresh perspective of what many see as the downfall of Tim Burton. I think it's important to establish the fact that Tim Burton has made 5 incredible feature films: Pee-wee, Beetlejuice, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and Ed Wood. I feel like if you're a fan of Tim Burton, these 5 have little discourse around them and they're considered his masterworks, with the exception of maybe Batman, some wrong people preferring the first to the second. There are other films that certain Tim Burton fans consider masterpieces, like Big Fish, Sleepy Hollow, and Corpse Bride, but I find these tend to have more discourse surrounding them. I'm not such a fan of Big Fish, for example, and I have the unique advantage of being right about everything. Now, any filmmaker with 5 incredible feature films under their belt would be considered among the best of all time. But why does it feel off to claim Tim Burton among the greats? I think there are 2 parts to this answer. Tim Burton managed to carve a strange path. While being a genuine outsider artist, he also got his start at Disney, and from the very beginning worked within the studio system and had a huge marketing team supporting his work. People might not remember that Batman's marketing was one of the most marketed movies in the world up to that point, and the sequel was even bigger. McDonald's had Beetlejuice toys, there was a Beetlejuice cartoon, and of course Hot Topic's never-ending clothing lines and toys. But even today, we still get odd Tim Burton-style marketing, like the Cadillac commercial with Timothée Chalamet. Tim Burton has essentially been shoved very forcefully down our throats for the last 30+ years. As I write this, I am glancing over to my Jack Skellington solar head Bobby toy thing in the corner. In that sense, I think we can get a little snobby. Seeing Tim Burton as one of the greats is also admitting that sometimes extremely popular things really are great, and sometimes some things just really do appeal to the masses. And that doesn't seem cool to most of us.
Steven, you could have played Batman. Would you have liked to have?
No.
Why not?
No, because it's just not me. I don't like to be in cartoons.
Imagine if David Lynch was marketed in the same vein as Tim Burton, and McDonald's sold little Eraserhead babies and tiny little oozy bird thingies in their Happy Meals.
Shut up and take my money!
Besides that being incredible, it would sour a bit having Walmart selling little toy oxygen tanks or humanoid rabbit dolls. Tim Burton is also odd in that he doesn't write his own movies. When we think of the great directors with intensely unique visions, the ones that commonly come to mind, they almost always write their own scripts. Kubrick, Paul Thomas Anderson, Godard, Kurosawa, Miyazaki, Coppola. The list goes on and on. Can we count Burton in the same caliber if he doesn't write his own scripts? Tim Burton doesn't even consistently work with the same writers, or editors, or producers, or anyone outside of actors and Danny Elfman, which is also strange given that he has such a unique vision in the world of filmmaking. You'd think he'd have a very specific team behind every movie. But I'd argue that supports the idea of his films being truly auteurist. He is the unifying factor. Beetlejuice was edited by Jane Curson, who he never worked with again. Batman was shot by Roger Pratt, who he never worked with again, and did not come back for Batman Returns. He did work with Stefan Zepsky as cinematographer for 3 films, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, and Ed Wood, but then never again. He did then work with editor Chris Levinson on 12 out of his 20 films, but Chris isn't editing Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. For that, he's going with I don't know how to say his name, Prickini, who has only one other screen credit, Scream 6. Tim Burton gets criticized for focusing on Willy Wonka instead of Charlie, but he didn't write that. He gets criticized for not having any real respect for the original story of Sleepy Hollow, but he didn't write that either. He didn't write any of it.
We're really good friends when we started Edward, and people have this fantasy that he stood behind me telling me what to write, but that's not true.
Okay.
I wrote it from my mind. He gave me the absolutely irreplaceable image of the character with scissors for hands.
As a filmmaker myself, I don't understand how you even let someone else edit your movie, let alone write it. It's very likely Tim Burton doesn't see himself as a writer at all. In fact, I think he barely even sees himself as a director. So how is it he's able to come out with 5 masterpieces? 5! A common theme in a Tim Burton movie is a character finding that the world isn't what they had always assumed it to be, that there's something magical, strange, and often unsettling lurking in the corners of our reality. In Beetlejuice, they become ghosts and enter the underworld. In Edward Scissorhands, she tries to sell cosmetics to the castle on the hill, overlooking their pastel world. And in The Nightmare Before Christmas, even Jack's worldview is shaken too. I love these moments because they exemplify the atmosphere. We get sucked into the film's world, into Tim's world. By the way, I do include The Nightmare Before Christmas as part of Tim Burton's canon, even though it was helmed by the incredible Henry Selick, who, if you've seen his short films and other features, undoubtedly infused his unique artistic expression into that film. But Tim Burton had worked on pre-production for the film for 10 years, wrote the poem that would become the film, which is the exact plot of the movie, and Tim Burton himself considers The Night Before Christmas to be the first film he ever began. Not to mention that it's through Tim that Danny Elfman worked on the film, which is honestly at least half of what makes that film what it is. So moving forward, I acknowledge Henry Selick's right to the film. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. But I will include The Nightmare Before Christmas in Tim's filmography, just not his role as director. P.S. To studios, especially Leica, please back Henry Selick's projects. He has so much more to offer the world and we're all being actively robbed. P.P.S. Caroline Thompson is a genius and I don't know why Tim Burton doesn't drop everything and just work exclusively with her. Edward Scissorhands, Night Before Christmas, Corpse Bride, Addams Family. I'm sure she's still got scripts no one will make. Before Mars attacks, Tim Burton had a masterful execution of tone. Let's analyze this scene from Edward Scissorhands. Peg is going door to door trying to sell makeup to her neighbors. She sees through the window of one of her neighbors playing the organ, and decides against ringing her doorbell. In 2 fairly long shots, we see her step into her car, and then frustratingly cross off the house from her checklist. We can still hear the organ playing. The tone for me is just perfect. A house being fumigated, children riding in circles on their plastic tricycles, the sound of the sprinklers. It lingers just enough to draw you in. It feels like summer in the suburbs. Interestingly, the script says that Peg looks in the window and sees the other woman lighting candles, not playing the organ. Whether this is a director decision or not is unknown, but Tim Burton has said that a script is only a small piece of the puzzle that is filmmaking, so he doesn't abide by them too much. We then see Peg look at the mansion in her sidecar mirror. The sound of the organ suddenly stops with the loud squeak of the mirror being adjusted. Her slight hesitation is only shown in her fingers tapping against the glass before she purses her lips and starts her car. She's the Avon lady. But then we see her turn her car around, and the scene plays out rather long. From this moment, it takes an entire 3 minutes to actually get inside of the house. One thing to note here, we get a quick point of view shot of the hedges. Tim Burton plays with point of view perspective throughout his films, and I just love how subtle and quick this one shot is. It lets us see what Peg sees before we get her reaction. She finds it beautiful. Then we get a longer point of view shot that, to me, is just remarkable. A wide lens with the hedges almost poking out of the screen. Feels like we're there. And the music.
It's the costumes, the lighting, the look, the acting, the camera move, everything at once to then create that right tone. And I just try to look for the case where it's just, it's a little bit heightened, but it still feels real. And it's something that Like I said, I've been very lucky to work with people that kind of just zoom, nail that tone.
Let's compare this to that same moment in Big Fish, when Edward decides to go up to the creepy house. I like Big Fish as an example because it's a movie that people love, but for me, it lost the atmosphere that I adored in Tim Burton films. A group of children walk with their flashlights to a creepy house where it said lives a witch. The scene is accompanied by a voiceover from Ewan McGregor. One of the kids, Edward, decides to go up to the witch's door and get her magic eye. The kid walks up to the house, clearly nervous the closer he gets. We stay on his face mostly, only briefly seeing the house before a cat runs and spooks him for a second. He continues forward and we cut to the same shot from before. He approaches the door, the music stays subtle, and before the kid can knock, the door swings open. From when he decided to go to the door opening is 1 minute. There's not really any lingering here. I don't feel like I'm there in that scene at all. I don't emotionally connect to it. To me, it just feels very stale and standard, like this is how you're supposed to do it. There was something in those older movies that felt more genuine and raw, almost. More daring before they started to become more and more safe. They were big-budget Hollywood movies with extravagant sets and huge worlds, but they felt like independent movies. Tim Burton has talked about working best within limitations, because that's when creativity flows, and that's what Tim Burton is genuinely the best at, being creative. The miniature set that Edward looks down on from his window, the breakfast machine in Pee-wee, the stop-motion worms in Beetlejuice. Imagine these things in CG, cleaned up and made to be perfect. They'd lose all their charm, everything that makes them unique and special, and in Tim Burton's world, you need charm. Perhaps one answer already to why Tim Burton's films feel so different now is that he's been making films for 40 years. He knows how to make films now. He isn't so limited because he not only understands the process, but creative problems that were once solved with odd camera angles, editing choices, matte painting, stop-motion effects, and practical means in general are now solved with CGI. He's no longer limited. This leads me to believe that Tim Burton is living a kind of contradictory film life. He has expressed multiple times in interviews how he doesn't like green screen and CG very much, how he prefers reality, real sets, and something that the actors can respond to. But at the same time, he is now known to utilize CG to an absurd level. I have to wonder if he is simply complacent in the changing times and studio demands, because it's the only life in film he's ever known. He started out in the studio and has never ventured outside of studios to make a film. He went against the grain in most of his creative decisions, but they were all still backed and pushed by studios. Even with his tremendous success, he has talked about how he has always figured it would get easier to get films made the more money he made the studios, but it never got any easier. What kind of personal films might be locked away that he is trying to get made? Is it Beetlejuice Beetlejuice? Because that, to me, seems like yet another safe bet from the studio. In the 90s and 2000s, we saw a big influx of films and media that were at least in part inspired by Tim Burton's style. It seemed like weird little personal projects were making their way onto the big screen like never before. But where are those movies now? Where have they been for the last 20 years? The dark and absurd worlds with unique aesthetics and art. I don't think it's that people just moved on and weren't excited about German Expressionism or dark-themed children's films. I think perhaps they just got too difficult to be made. You could argue a case for Over the Garden Wall, What We Do in the Shadows, or Bird Boy, but even still they are far and few between, and not exactly on a studio Hollywood level. Perhaps the decline of Tim Burton's output could be attributed to major studios no longer willing to take risks on weird little personal stories where the market isn't super clear. Who is Edward Scissorhands for? It's a difficult market to pinpoint. It is certainly not for children, but it is a fairy tale. But then, a lot of the movie is from the perspective of adults looking in on a teenage world. Personally, I don't think Tim Burton made any children's films until Charlie and the Chocolate Factory in 2005. Pee-wee is thought of as a children's film, but I find it to be a movie about the personification of nostalgia for childhood, which is different. It's difficult to say, because his filmography shows he kept making strange films. But besides Big Eyes, they're all based on highly successful intellectual properties. Tim Burton has always used intellectual properties. Batman, Planet of the Apes, Sleepy Hollow, but they were also always sprinkled in between the projects with original concepts. Alice in Wonderland made a ridiculous amount of money and kicked off the whole Disney live-action remake frenzy we're in. If I were a big head executive at a major Hollywood studio, and I've got this guy that can make me $1 billion money-making machine of a movie, I'd give away my money and live under a bridge and rethink my life and what it means to be human. But assuming I'm also greedy, which is usually a requirement for the mega rich, I'd be milking Tim Burton for all he can muster. I'd be making sure the scripts he gets are based on success, can almost guarantee success, and I don't want any of those dinky little no money making Ed Wood movies. So, what makes a Tim Burton movie bad? I think this is an interesting question because thematically, he's seemingly still doing his thing. Darker toned stories that are often criticized for being a parody of themselves. Everyone expects Dumbo to be Dumbo, but dark. The Burtonized version of himself. He carries this expectation for his work, and I think it's epitomized in this commercial he did for Samsung.
Really excited that you like our game.
This is all the kind of stuff I love, you know, zombies, unicorns, the apocalypse.
They just rocked.
Guys, this is getting a little too weird for me.
It's kind of sad to see, because throughout the research of this essay, I found so many interviews where he talks about how he hates labels and boxes, how he never thought of himself as weird, and it was only because he was called weird that he started to consider himself as different.
Well, you know, it's like growing up very early on in life, as everybody is sort of put into categories, you know, and I don't know how I got put into the weird category because I never felt strange anyway. Right. And so being put into that category, you're kind of set aside, so you kind of feel like outside looking in, and so therefore everything does seem strange. Everything does seem, because right off the bat you're kind of going, well, I don't feel weird, but people are saying I'm weird. So then you start sort of seeing things from a different perspective that way. And so, but I'm glad of it because I think that's, you know, the way it is. It's life is strange and beautiful.
He seems flustered when he's asked about his love for skeletons and dark things, as even that seems like too much of a generalization for how he feels.
You know, so much material about, you know, vampires and skeletons and people who die and come back from the dead or don't come back.
Sounds really depressing.
Yeah, I mean, say, does it, you know, does it feel reductive if people only think of you that way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, you spend your life, you know, feeling like a creature and trying to become a human being, and then they try to turn you back into some kind of weird creature again. But I mean, I love those things. I love skeletons. We all do. We all have them.
The world of Tim Burton is not equal to slapping black and white stripes and skulls on everything, but this is what is expected of him, and likely he feels pressure to not only deliver on these expectations, but also subvert them, which in turn results in films that are just simply disingenuine. Tim Burton is a genuine artist. His drawings are incredible, and he even impressed veteran Disney animators.
You just flip every page and it was just like this exquisite, extraordinary design, character, person, and you'd ask him, like, where did you get the idea to this? He'd go, oh, I was just walking around the mall, and that was some chick that was walking down to the shoe store.
He truly sees the world in a different way, and when that translates to the screen, it's incredible and unique. I went to the Tim Burton exhibit a while ago and was really floored by the art he produced for his classics. They're absolutely incredible. But what really surprised me was the work he put in for Alice in Wonderland. The drawings were stunning. You could see the passion he had for the project. Absolutely beautiful art from a truly creative artist. But where's the Dumbo art? Or the Miss Peregrine art? There are some, but it is difficult to find, and when you do find it, the sketches feel uninspired, lazy, and almost bored. So, what happens to the outsider artist who gets everything? Another big critique of Tim Burton films is his use of CG, to which I agree wholeheartedly. And Tim Burton seems to agree as well, given that he doesn't like working on green screen sets and that he felt uncomfortable not being able to see the main character of Dumbo until a week before the press tour. So if this wasn't Tim's decision, whose was it? And how many of these kinds of decisions is he losing? CG is an enigmatic force for me that I can't really connect to outside of Foley CG movies. Like Bugs Bunny and Space Jam, it's interesting to look at. In fact, I love 2D live-action movies. They're so bizarre. But I am completely disconnected from Bugs Bunny here because the texture is so removed from reality that only works within the confines of its own world. CG is like that too, or at least for CG characters. It's gotten extremely good when the budget is willing. Pikachu here looks absolutely incredible, but that fur, as amazing as it looks, or that cat from Toy Story, I can't quite feel it. We get uncanny valley when we see CG faces because we as humans are so good at recognizing human faces on a subconscious level. I think the same is true for the world around us. We can just tell when it's CG, most of the time, outside of maybe environments. Dumbo has incredible elephant-like skin, but that's a CG animal. It isn't real. And as beautifully lit as that skin is, I can't fully imagine what it feels like. If it were a puppet, I could immediately recognize the feeling of its material. Like Kermit. I know what Kermit feels like. I'm connected to Kermit. I love Kermit. Kermit, I love you. When we see de-aging effects, we say it takes us out of the movie. I've always personally preferred the lost art of casting similar looking actors, because it's a movie. You accept the zippers and the boom mic shadows. Your disbelief is suspended. So, I do think that CGI is a definite partial cause of the decline of Tim Burton movies, and I think at least on some level that Tim Burton would agree with me here. I think as well there is something to be said about the death of the mid-budget movie, which if you haven't heard of before, I highly suggest looking into it. Maybe I'll make a video about that too. Much like Johnny Depp, who took on daring and strange roles to shake an image of himself he didn't like, only to become one of the most successful Hollywood actors of all time, it feels like Tim Burton was cast in the same iron. They're both now extremely wealthy and extremely good at making money, and they both come from actual genuine artist backgrounds who made bold, against-the-grain choices to now feeling like puppets to the Hollywood machine. It's not to say that Tim Burton is a hollow shell making movies for the studio. I think that he did put his heart into Dumbo, and he really connected with the story, but it failed more because of modern filmmaking than it did anything else. Movies that feel like they're constructed for the audience of today, trying to compete in a highly oversaturated market. I think Tim Burton loves the process of making a movie, the idea stage, the concept art, and the getting excited stage. He often calls his set family. He loves shooting. I don't think he has too much love for everything that comes after. Checking the box office, reading reviews. After 40 years, that must take a toll on you. Finally, this all brings me towards the point of his new film, Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. I haven't seen any trailers for it, I haven't read about it. I just wasn't really excited at all when I heard about it, which for me is just sad as I've always been a huge Tim Burton fan, but I have to preface that every time I say it with pre-Alice in Wonderland Tim Burton. Yeah, I like Planet of the Apes, and I've seen the original and all their sequels too, so fight me. I've now looked into it a bit, and I feel like my lack of hope is justified. First, Batman had a total of 8 producers, which I think is a lot, but considering it was a massive Hollywood summer blockbuster, it does make sense. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice has 17 producers, more than double. That's a lot of cooks in the kitchen. Now obviously it is uncertain what all their roles are, but that is still a room packed with people that have a say. Second, it's written by the duo who brought you your favorites, such as Herbie Fully Loaded, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor, and the classic I Am Number 4. Their highest rated movie is Shanghai Noon, which I watched again recently. Though fun, it's not very good. That's not to say they just haven't had their chance to shine with that one script they've poured their soul into, but it doesn't exactly inspire hope either. It's also shot by a person who mostly only does modern Hollywood movies, and as I said earlier, it's edited by someone who has only one screen credit, Scream 6. The production designer also has only one credit. The art directors also have few credits and only modern films. The only returning collaborators beyond Danny Elfman in the cast is Colleen Atwood, the costume designer who is incredible but did not work on the original Beetlejuice either. So that's the crew. Which isn't to say anything about their talent, but it does speak to the fact that they're all basically working to simulate something they weren't actually part of. They don't do Tim Burton films, or 80s and 90s films for that matter. It just all seems like a strange choice to me. As a huge fan of Beetlejuice, I'll say this. Beetlejuice, the character, shined in a movie where he had only 17 minutes of screen time because the focus wasn't on his antics. It was about Lydia and Alan and Barbara. It was a film about the perspective of the ghosts. Beetlejuice was the villain. As much as we loved him for Michael Keaton's performance, Beetlejuice is a bad person. I hope to not see Beetlejuice Beetlejuice try to redeem him, but I would definitely be up for exploring his background and character more, just not the focus of the film. I definitely don't want to see him fall in love. It could be fun, and the original will always exist, and nothing can ruin that, even if this becomes a franchise and goes the way of Land Before Time. The original is always there to go back to. So, in conclusion, I don't really have an answer, just a string of different ideas. Truthfully, maybe there is no answer. He's just making bad movies now and we're all sad because we got attached to the magic that doesn't exist anymore. But is it really anywhere in modern cinema anyway? Maybe why we all feel so strongly about the downfall of Tim Burton is because he represented something special. He represented one of the corners of the 90s where magic lived and things were genuinely stranger. And we hoped for that beacon to continue from those creators who made the 90s the way that they were. But they don't. The world changed extremely fast these last 30 years. And I think that generation of artists feel that they need to adapt to modern times. But we love them for their authenticity and their boldness. And that's what cinema needs more of now, more than ever before. This is purely opinion-based stuff backed by a bunch of probably biased stuff I read on the internet and in real-life physical books. Simplified not for your understanding but for my own. I am not an expert in anything but rather a hobbyist and an avid reader of things that make me go, If you'd like more opinion-based stuff, please consider subscribing. And if you'd like to rip me apart in the comments, please consider maybe not doing that. I am fragile, but I do love solid discourse with purpose and not mean name calling. Okay, thank you, goodbye.